The coffee was hot, and that was the thing that put the hair up on Sergeant Ray Cooper's neck before his mind had caught up to why. 9 men had left the mountain in that camp. Cooper had the roster memorized, the way he memorized everything that could get somebody killed, and 9 men do not walk away from a fire with the pot still on it. Not on Shasta, not at 11,000 feet in November, with the wind coming off the glacier like something with a grudge. A man on this mountain guards fire the way he guards ammunition, because both of them are the difference between the walk down and the thing that happens to men who cannot make the walk down. You do not leave coffee going, you do not leave a fire built up and tended, and nobody sitting at it. Cooper crouched by the pot and put the back of his hand near it without touching. Hot. Fresh hot. 20 minutes at the outside, maybe less than that. The skin the wind was drawing across the surface of the coffee had only begun to form, thin as breath on a window pane. And beneath it the black in the pot was still moving in the slow undertow of its own steam. Cooper knew coffee the way he knew rifles. This had been made within the last hour, and the man who had tended it had not gone far, because a man does not walk far from a fire at 11,000 feet in November unless he is planning to come back to it. He stood and put his eyes around the camp the way 2 wars had taught him to put his eyes around a place, not looking for something, looking for the absence of what should be there. 9 bedrolls laid out in a proper cold camp square. 9 rifles stacked in a proper cold camp stack, the muzzles up and the butts angled inward and the slings dressed. 9 sets of gear arranged in the neat and slightly obsessive way that men arrange gear when they have been living in a small space with each other for weeks. A meal half served on tin plates, 3 of them with the food gone cold in the wind, and 3 of them not touched at all, and the serving spoon still standing up in the pot of beans like a man had been ladling it out and set it down mid-motion. 9 men's worth of everything a man needs to live on a mountain, and not one man, not a track leaving. That was the part Cooper would carry to his grave. Fresh snow from the night before, 4 inches of it, holding a print like wet plaster, and their own boots coming in were the only marks on it. 4 sets Cooper's detail, and around the camp itself a churn of prints that ended at the camp's edge in every direction and did not continue, as if 9 men had walked to the edges of their own firelight and simply stopped being anywhere. Cooper had seen camps overrun and camps abandoned in a hurry. He had never in his life seen a camp where the men were gone and their gear was untouched, and the ground around the camp said, with the clear, stupid honesty of ground, that they had not walked out of it. "Lieutenant," Cooper said, and he heard his own voice come out flat and careful, the war voice, the one that came up out of him before his judgment did. "You need to come look at this, and you need to come look at it slow." In November of 1951, a 4-man detail from the United States Army's 6th Army Command, headquartered at the Presidio of San Francisco, ascended the southern flank of Mount Shasta in far northern California to determine what had become of a 9-man weather and communications detachment that had gone silent 11 days earlier. The missing detachment was real, and its mission was mundane, which is what made the silence wrong. In 1951, the Army maintained a scatter of high-altitude weather and radio relay stations across the Western Mountains, Cold War infrastructure, the kind of thing a country builds when it has decided that the next war will need eyes and ears on every high place, and has not yet decided whether the next war is coming. The Shasta detachment had been placed on the mountain's southern shoulder in October to test cold weather radio equipment and to log winter weather data at altitude. 9 men, 1 lieutenant, standard rotation, weekly radio check-ins. The check-ins had come in on schedule for 3 weeks. Then one had come in wrong, a partial transmission, the detachment's radio man keying the set and speaking for 11 seconds before the signal cut. 11 seconds that the operator at the Presidio had logged, and that the recovery detail would carry up the mountain like a stone in the boot. Then nothing. 2 missed check-ins. Then the detail. First Lieutenant David Aldrich, 28, led it. He was a signal officer, not a mountain man, sent because the missing detachment was a signal detachment, and the Army's logic held that a signal officer would best understand what a signal detachment's equipment could tell him about what had gone wrong. He had never climbed anything higher than a telephone pole in the line of duty. He knew this about himself and had said so to his commanding officer and had been told, not unkindly, that this was why he was being given Cooper. Sergeant Ray Cooper, 43, was the reason the detail had a chance of coming down. He had gone up Italian mountains under German guns in 1944 and Korean mountains under Chinese guns in 1950, and the peacetime army had learned to send him where the ground itself was the enemy, because Cooper read ground the way a preacher reads scripture, with total attention and no illusions. He did not much like officers as a class, and he had decided within an hour of meeting Aldrich that this one would do, because Aldrich had asked him what he did not know, instead of pretending to know it. The other two were Corporal Frank Webb, 24, who had done a season of civilian mountaineering in Colorado and was the closest thing the detail had to a technical climber, and Private Thomas Morrison, 19, who was strong and willing and had never seen snow before he joined the army 8 months prior, and who Cooper watched like a hawk because a 19-year-old on a mountain is a casualty looking for a place to happen. They started up from the timberline camp on the second day. The weather held cold clear, the kind of high-pressure window that comes to Shasta in November and does not last. By the afternoon of the third day, they reached the coordinates of the missing detachment station, and they found the camp, and Cooper found the coffee, and the mountain stopped being a rescue and became something else. Aldrich came and looked, slow, the way Cooper had told him to. He was an engineer by training, and he did what engineers do, which is to inventory. He counted the bedrolls and the rifles and the plates. He confirmed against his roster 9 of everything. He found the radio, the whole reason a signal officer had been sent, and it was intact, powered off, undamaged, sitting on its case with the logbook beside it, as though the operator had just finished an entry and gone to get his supper. Aldrich picked up the logbook with the specific care of a man who has understood, all at once, that everything in this camp is evidence, and that he does not yet know of what. The log was routine to the end. Weather readings, equipment tests, the small, dull record of 9 men doing their jobs at 11,000 feet. The final dated entry was from the morning of the 11 days ago transmission, and it recorded nothing. A temperature, a wind speed, a note that the radio test scheduled for that evening would proceed as planned. Signed off in a neat, trained hand, the kind of entry a man makes and thinks nothing more about, and goes on to his supper. And then, below it, in a different hand, hurried, pressed hard enough to tear the page in one place. 3 lines that were not a log entry at all. They are coming up out of the ice. We can hear them under the glacier. Halstead went to look and did not. The entry stopped there, mid-word, as if the man writing it had been interrupted by the thing he was writing about. Aldrich read it aloud, because in that camp, in that wind, reading it silently seemed like a thing a man should not do alone. When he finished, nobody said anything for a while. The wind came up off the glacier and moved through the guy ropes of the tents in that low, complaining hum that wind makes when it has miles of ice to work with. And somewhere on the packed snow a piece of gear ticked once against a rifle stock. Nothing else. It was Cooper who finally spoke, and what he said was the practical thing, the thing that came out of 11 years of surviving other men's disasters. Under the glacier, Cooper said. Whitney Glacier is up and to the north of us, 1/2 mile maybe. He looked at the churned snow around the camp, at the boot prints that went to the edges of the firelight and stopped. But that is not where they went. There is no track to the glacier. There is no track anywhere. 9 men did not walk out of this camp, Lieutenant. Not on this snow. If they had walked, I would see it. Snow this fresh holds everything. They walked to the edges and they stopped, and then they were not here. Webb, the mountaineer, said the thing that mountaineers say because it is usually true. Could be the wind, Sergeant. Wind on a mountain wipes track. Ground blizzard comes through. An hour later you would never know an army passed. Wind that wipes track, wipes all track, Cooper said. It would have wiped ours coming in. It did not. Our track is clean back to the timberline. Their track is gone from the edge of camp out. Wind does not cut a line like that. Wind does not decide. He shook his head. That is not weather, Corporal. I do not know what it is, but I have been wrong about weather twice in my life, and both times it cost me men, so I know exactly how sure I am, and I am sure. Aldrich, holding the logbook still, looked at the last 3 lines and then at the ground and then at Cooper. He was young for the rank he held, and he was aware, standing there in the wind with the wrong dead camp around him, that his career was not what mattered now. "Sergeant Cooper," he said, "I'm going to defer to you on the ground. If you tell me the ground says a thing, I take that as the ground saying it." "What do you want to do?" "I want to leave," Cooper said. "That is what I want. What I recommend is different. We are here, and this is our detail, and we have not yet found out what happened. And if we go down now with what we have, they will send another 4 men up." He looked at Aldrich, and there was something in the look that was not quite the look of a sergeant addressing a lieutenant. "We find out what we can find out in daylight, and we go down. We do not sleep in this camp, we cold camp above it where we can watch it. And if the ground shows us anything else we do not like, we log it and we go down." "Agreed," Aldrich said. Morrison, the 19-year-old, had not moved from where he had stopped at the camp's edge, and when he spoke his voice cracked in the way a young man's does when he is working hard to keep it from doing worse. "Sergeant, something in the ice." They went to him. He was pointing down past the camp's edge to where the ground sloped away toward the glacier's foot. And in the packed snow of the slope, running from the camp toward the ice, was a single track after all, one set of prints, one man leading away toward the glacier and not coming back. Cooper crouched over the first print for a long time. "This is the only one," he said finally. "One man walked out of here toward that glacier. The log says Halstead went to look. This will be Halstead." He put his light down the line of prints. They went straight, steady, unhurried, a man walking toward something, not running from it, down the slope and out of the reach of the failing afternoon light, toward the blue foot of the ice. "The other 8, Aldrich asked. "The other 8 do not have tracks," Cooper said. "One man walked out of this camp. 8 men left it some way that does not leave a track. I can only tell you what the ground tells me, and the ground is telling me 2 different things happened here, and I do not like either one. They followed Halstead's track because it was the only track there was to follow, and because Aldrich made the decision to and Cooper did not argue it, though he made Aldrich write his reasoning in the field log first, the way a man makes another man sign for something dangerous. The reasoning was brief. The tracks were the only evidence they had of where any man had gone. They would follow until sundown and no further. They would go roped, on Webb's judgment. They would not go onto crevassed ice in the failing light. The track led them down the slope and onto the foot of Whitney Glacier as the light went orange and then blue and then began to go all together. The prints crossed onto the ice and held to a route that Webb the mountaineer examined and pronounced sound, a path along solid ice that avoided the crevasses a man could not have seen in the fading light, that a man could not have chosen without knowing they were there. He knew where the cracks were, Webb said, and there was something in his voice now that had not been there when he had offered up the wind, in the dark, coming down here on foot, alone, at night. He walked the safe line like he had a map of it, or like something was walking with him, Cooper said. He did not say it loud. He said it to himself, mostly, and to the mountain, in the way a man does when he has thought a thing and does not know whether to unthink it. They went slow along the track, roped, Webb leading because Webb knew ice, Cooper next, Aldrich third with the logbook buttoned inside his coat, Morrison last. The prints did not deviate. They did not hesitate. They walked a line across the glacier that a surveyor could not have improved, from the camp's edge to a point roughly 200 yards out onto the ice, and then they ended. The track ended at the ice, not at a crevasse, not at a fall. At a place on the flat of the glacier where Halstead's last print pressed into the snow, leaning forward, the toe deeper than the heel, the mark of a man mid-stride taking a step, and then no further print, and no disturbance, and no crevasse, and no reason. A man walking across solid ice had taken a step, and the step had no landing. The snow ahead of that last print was smooth and unbroken and blue in the last of the light, and Cooper stood over it and did not put his hand out toward it, and Aldrich noticed that he did not, and did not put his own out either. Webb crouched by the last print for a long time. He tested the ice with the flat of his axe, listening. He walked a slow arc around the last print, looking down through the surface for any sign of a crack, a soft spot, a covered crevasse. He found none. The ice under Halstead's last print was as solid as any ice on Whitney Glacier, and the ice a step beyond it was as solid as the ice under it, and there was nothing between the two that a man could have gone into. "Sergeant," Webb said, and his voice had gone thin. "The ice is whole. He did not go through. There is no through to go. And under the ice, when the four of them went still and stopped their own noise, there was a sound. It was faint, and it was low, and it was regular. It came up through the glacier under their boots, a pulse of something, a rhythm so slow and so deep that Cooper felt it in his chest more than heard it in his ears. It was not water moving. Cooper knew the sound of water under ice. The mountain was full of it. This was not that. This was steady in a way that water is not steady, spaced in a way that natural things are not spaced. It was under them, and it was deep, and it did not vary, and it had, unmistakably and impossibly, the quality of something that was doing a thing on purpose, and had been doing it for a very long time. Morrison started to shake, and it was not the cold. Cooper felt it come up through his boots and settle in the base of his spine, and he stood very still and let it be what it was, because he had learned long ago that a man's first instinct in the face of an impossibility is to argue with it, and that arguing with it is how a man gets himself killed. He did not argue. He listened long enough to be sure that the sound was under him and not in him, and that it was regular in a way nothing under a mountain has any business being regular. And then he turned his head very slowly and looked at Aldrich. Aldrich's face in the last blue light was the face of a man who has just understood something he does not want to have understood. He was looking down at the ice between his boots. He was listening, and he was hearing. And Cooper could see the moment on him when the engineer in him tried to build a rational structure over what he was hearing, and could not, and gave up trying. Aldrich made the decision then, and he made it fast, and he never once regretted it. "We are going up," he said, "off the ice, now. We are not following this any further tonight, and we may not be following it at all." They went up off the glacier in the last of the light, back to the empty camp, and they did not sleep in it. Cooper would not have it, and Aldrich did not argue that either. They cold camped 200 yards off, above the station, where they could watch it, and they set a watch, 2 men waking through the night, and nothing came and nothing left, and the coffee pot, when they checked it at dawn, had gone cold at last. Cooper took the second watch. He sat with his back against a low outcrop above the camp, with his rifle across his knees, and his eyes on the tents below and the glacier beyond, and he did not think in the useful way a soldier learns not to think when thinking will do him no good. He watched the glacier, which glowed faintly in what starlight came through the thin, high cloud, and he did not hear the sound again in his ears. Whether he felt it in his boots he did not tell anyone, and would not, ever. Toward morning, Morrison, coming off his watch, sat down beside Cooper and said, in the small voice of a man who has decided to say a thing before the daylight makes it harder to say, "Sergeant, what was that under the ice?" "I do not know," Cooper said. "Was it alive?" Cooper looked at the young private for a long moment. "Morrison," he said, "there are questions a man asks because he wants the answer, and questions a man asks because the asking is the answer. The one you just asked is the second kind. You already know what you think it was. So do I. Neither of us is going to say it out loud on this mountain. We are going to go down in the morning and let some officer with a warm office decide what to call it. Do you follow me?" "Yes, Sergeant. Get some sleep." He did not sleep. Cooper did not expect him to. They went down the mountain the next day with the logbook and the radio, with the field notes and the photographs, and with 9 men's worth of gear that they packed out, because leaving it felt like leaving the men, and with no men at all. Cooper looked back once from the timberline and could not see the camp or the glacier or anything above the tree line, but a wall of grey moving cloud, and he thought, though he did not say it, that the mountain was closing the door behind them, and that this was probably the closest thing to a mercy this mountain was going to give any of them. The 11-second transmission, when the Army's signal analysts cleaned it up, contained the voice of the detachment's radio man speaking fast and low. Most of it was buried under the noise the equipment had picked up in those same seconds, a low, pulsed, rhythmic noise that the analysts logged as unidentified interference, mechanical character, source undetermined, and that Cooper, when he was allowed to hear the recording, identified without hesitation as the sound under the ice. The words the radio man managed in those 11 seconds were these: "Under the glacier, it has been under the glacier the whole time. We have been sitting on top of it for 3 weeks, and it has been. Halstead, do not. Halstead." And then the sound rose up and took the signal, and the transmission ended. The 9 men of the Shasta detachment were carried on Army rolls as missing, presumed lost in mountaineering accident during winter operations, a determination that Lieutenant Aldrich's own report did not support, and that his report was not permitted to contradict. He was debriefed by 2 officers, whose command he could not identify, who took the logbook and the recording and the photographs, who informed him that the Whitney Glacier Station had been discontinued, and that the southern flank of Mount Shasta was closed to Army activity pending geological assessment, and who told him, at the end, in the flat, courteous voice of men closing a door, that his account of what the ground had shown and what the ice had sounded like was noted and would require no further action from him. He asked whether anyone was going back for the 8 men who had left no track. He was told that the recovery operation was complete. He asked what was under the glacier. He was told that the question was outside the scope of the debriefing. He asked whether the men he had led up the mountain would be debriefed as well, and he was told that those matters were being handled, and that he was not to discuss the Shasta detail with anyone else in perpetuity, and that this instruction carried the full weight of the Army's Classified Operations Authority. Aldrich understood. He had been an engineer long enough to recognize a door being closed with a decision on the other side of it. He said, "Yes, sir," and he walked out of the Presidio office into the fog off the bay. And he did not speak of the Shasta detail to any man in uniform for the rest of his years of service. Sergeant Ray Cooper served 4 more years and retired in 1955 with 2 wars and 1 mountain behind him, and of the 3, he would only ever speak of the wars. Corporal Frank Webb left the Army in 1953 and went home to Colorado and climbed mountains for the rest of his life, and never once climbed anything in the Cascades, and never went within 100 miles of Mount Shasta, and told his wife, when she asked him once why not, that some ground remembers a man and there is no reason to give it a second chance. Private Thomas Morrison finished his enlistment and went home to a small town in Missouri and worked in a hardware store for 40 years and slept badly for the rest of his life. Lieutenant David Aldrich served until 1968 and retired a lieutenant colonel, and in 1989 at 66 he wrote an account of the Shasta detail for his own family, which is the only reason a version of it survives outside a classified file that has never been released. He closed it this way: "I have spent 38 years as a man who was sent up a mountain to find 9 soldiers and came back down having found only their coffee, still hot, and 1 set of footprints that walked out onto a glacier and stopped in the middle of solid ice. I am an engineer. I believe in causes. I have constructed, over 4 decades, every rational account I can build of what happened on Mount Shasta in November of 1951, and I have found each of them harder to hold than the impossibility it was meant to replace, because I was there, and I held the logbook, and I read the last 3 lines the radio man never finished, and I stood on the glacier in the dark and felt the thing beneath it, keeping its slow, patient time under my boots." Sergeant Cooper told me 2 things happened in that camp, and the ground could only tell him what, not why. 1 man walked out toward the ice following something, and the ice took him mid-stride. 8 men left the camp some way that leaves no track at all. I have thought about the difference between those 2 fates for 38 years, and I have come to believe it is the difference between the man who follows and the men who do not get a choice. Halstead followed. He went to look, the log says, and the ice took him the way it takes a man who walks toward it. The other 8 did not go to look. Whatever was under that glacier came up for them anyway, and it left no track, because it does not walk the way we walk, and it does not need to. I have had a good life since, but I will tell my grandchildren, who will read this and think it a strange thing for their grandfather to have set down, the one thing the mountain taught me that no manual ever could. There are old things sleeping under the high cold places of this country, older than the country, older than the ice they sleep in. Men keep building stations on top of them, weather stations, radio stations, shelters. whatever the century's fear requires, and now and then a station goes up in the wrong place, over a thing that has been keeping its slow time in the dark for longer than there have been men to disturb it, and the station goes silent, and the army sends 4 men to find out why, and 3 of them come home. I came home. Cooper came home. Webb came home. We came home because when the thing rose up under the ice, we went up off it, and we went down the mountain, and we did not follow. Halstead followed, and the 8 were never given the chance. And I have decided, in my old age, that the whole of the wisdom I ever earned in a long life of service comes down to what a sergeant felt in his chest through the soles of his boots on the Whitney Glacier and had the sense to trust. When the ground tells you 2 different things happened, and you do not like either one, when the coffee is hot and the men are gone, and the only track leads out onto the ice and stops, you do not follow it to find out. You log it. You carry down what you can carry, and you leave the high cold places to the old things that were keeping them long before your century arrived, with its stations and its fears, and will be keeping them long after. Go down the mountain, that is the whole of it. Go down the mountain and let the sleeping thing sleep.